Hi guys. So this is the first demonstration video beyond the installers, and it is going to be a sort of brief introduction to the command line interface. Now this is in the desktop series, and it is the one exception in the desktop series because all other videos in the desktop series will absolutely contain will absolutely contain all GUI instructions, which means that you should be able to follow along with all of the remaining videos in this series without delving into the terminal, if very much at all, if at all, really. I'm going to try to make it so that it can be 100% avoided, which means that technically speaking, this video should be 100% skippable if all you want to do is stay on the desktop side of things. If you're not interested in learning about the terminal, or if you're terminal adverse or terminal shy or whatever, you absolutely can skip this video safely, or at the very least I'm going to try to make it very, very, very rare that we delve into anything in the terminal and other videos in the desktop series without showing you a desktop counterpart to work around what I'm doing in the terminal as well. Having said that, though, I think that it is a very important tool to learn and understand, and to try to learn to use in Linux. There are a lot of things that can be done in much more efficient ways than in the terminal, or than the GUI side of things. So doing it in the terminal is faster in a lot of cases. I think that that it is beneficial to try and understand it at least a little bit. So having said that, I absolutely understand why it's intimidating, because basically you're greeted with like a blinking cursor, much like this, and that's generally all you get in a terminal. So this is an example of a TTY. For those of you who don't know, this is the server configuration that we set up in the very first advanced video series, and it's just a terminal, and that's all it is. So I get why that's intimidating, because you look at it and you're like, what do I do now? There's nothing in there. So I want you guys to understand that it's a tool, right? It's there to help you. It's not there to intimidate you. It's there to make your life easier, not harder. That's the whole point of it. It is a tool, and you can choose to use it, or you can choose not to use it. And either way, that's generally okay. Sometimes in Linux you do come across situations where, for instance, if your video driver fails you, it might be nice to understand how to use the terminal, because you'll get dumped into a terminal. A lot of those scenarios are scenarios where if the equivalent situation happened in Windows, you might end up reformatting your computer. Whereas in Linux, you can tend to fix it. Having said that, though, with Linux, the terminal is more optional than it used to be. It used to be you kind of had to know the terminal in order to be effective. And that's still the case depending on what distribution you use, and more importantly, what desktop environment you're using. If you're using a feature-complete desktop environment like GNOME or KDE, or perhaps even something like Unity and some of the others out there, I'm not really 100% sure on a lot of the other ones because I don't know them that well. But if you're trying to use something like Awesome Window Manager or something a bit more Spartan like that, then yeah, you're going to have some terminal work. But if you're in a desktop environment like GNOME or KDE, then generally I would say 99% of all the tasks can basically be done within the GUI without any problems. Not learning and understanding the terminal in Linux is generally the same as not learning and understanding the terminal in Windows, with the exception that the terminal in Linux is far more powerful, flexible, and advanced. I guess arguably, unless you count PowerShell. But I don't really know PowerShell that well, so I can't really argue one way or the other on that one. But the Linux terminal the Linux terminal is something where if you do use Linux and you don't use the terminal, you are missing out. However, if all you're going to do is use your computer to browse the web, maybe watch YouTube videos or watch even normal videos, movies or whatever that you have on your computer. If you're going to, play a Steam game, if that's all you plan on doing with your computer is basic office and general entertainment stuff, then you're probably fine never touching the terminal unless something goes wrong with your video driver and it dumps you into a TTY. Which generally only happens if you're working with packages outside of the stable repository. As long as you stick to stable and everything was set up right initially, you're fine, and you'll never have to really worry about it. So having said all that, let's go ahead and start taking a look at the terminal. But we're not going to look at it from this TTY perspective, because that's the server, and that's for a different deal there. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over and let's pop into our GNOME session here and check out what a terminal looks like from GNOME. So one of the things you'll notice about the terminal is that we throw around a lot of different terminologies. So let's get some terminology in order here so that you can understand what it is exactly we're talking about. So let's log into GNOME here. Oops. And we should get a desktop in a few seconds. Bear with me, it is a virtual machine, so it might be a little more sluggish than you might see on real hardware. I did configure it so it would stretch the entire desktop and everything and look nice for you guys, so you can get a good idea of what it'll look like, and also so that you can hopefully see a little bit better. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this upper left portion up here called Activities, and that's going to give us this sort of weird full screenish Windows 8-esque window. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in here terminal, and you can find it without typing that if you want. By navigating the menus. I'll show you that in just a second. But once you launch the terminal, you'll get something that looks about like this. And you can actually also click this little icon here to show applications. And in there you'll get your list of applications, and in here you can actually find your terminal by navigating this way as well. You don't have to type if you don't want to. But typing obviously is a little bit quicker, so that's good. So I'm just going to, let's see if I can get this thing configured to look a little bit better. Preferences maybe? Yeah, there we go. Profiles. Edit. Colors. Alright, let me just darken that up a little bit so that you can see it better. And let's see, can we increase the font size? Custom font. Yeah, we can. Okay. Let's bam that up a notch. There we go. Alright, so you should be able to read that a little bit better. I'm just going to double click on that top bar up there, and that should give me a big terminal. So what you will notice here is we have what's called a prompt. So when I say terminal emulator, terminal emulators are the applications that you're actually launching in order to get to the terminal. So the terminal emulator would be, in this case, GNOME Terminal. In KDE's case, it would be a program called Console. And there are many, many other ones out there, especially tied to different desktop environments. The shell is the program running inside the terminal that provides your prompts and interprets your commands. In this case, and in most cases, it will be bash, and for now we're going to leave it at bash. But for those of you who are curious, other shells include things like the Korn shell, which I wouldn't recommend you use, but there are some diehards out there. ZSH, which is fantastic, especially for learning, but it's not the default, and I don't want to get into installing all that right now, so we're just going to talk about bash. So bash, basically, you'll notice you have this prompt. The prompt will give your username by default, an @ symbol, and then the name of the computer that you were logged into. That's going to be important later when we talk about concepts like SSH in the more advanced video series. And then you have this funny little colon character here, which doesn't really mean anything. It's mostly just a semantic to separate out the different portions of the prompt, much like this @ symbol here. And then you have this tilde. This little tilde indicates that you were in your home directory. The tilde is literally a shortcut for home. And then you have the $sign. And the $sign looks really cryptic. It's not. It just means you're in a normal user account and not root. If I elevate to root, which I can do with sudo tac-i, and give the password, you'll notice the prompt changes to a hash symbol. This hash symbol means you were logged in as the root user. And you can also tell because it says root @ over here. So yeah, it's a little redundant, but most default bash prompts should look something like that. To exit root, you would type exit. And if you type exit again, the terminal window will actually close. So, avoid that for now. Alright, so one of the first things you notice about the prompt is it's just a blinking cursor. It doesn't really give you any indication of what to do. And I think that's probably why people get intimidated by the console and by the terminal and all that. So let's go ahead and show you guys how you can figure out what to do. Now I think the first instinct people have is to just type help, which will output some stuff. This gives you what you call the built-in functions in this shell. So this is generally all the built-in commands, and this does not represent the commands you can generally run, and really is not it's not the complete list, and most of these commands are not commands you would normally run. Most of these commands are, not normally. You'll be using other commands more than these. I should say, if I phrase this in a way you guys can understand. However, there is one interesting one here. Actually, there's a few interesting ones here, and we will actually be talking about most of these commands. Most of the commands we're going to be talking about today in this video are actually going to be on this list. But I'm going to break off the list and show you some other things too. So there is one that's really interesting that I would be kind of surprised how many people know about this, because it is more obscure. But one of the more, I guess, frustrating aspects is understanding what commands are actually available to you. Now, some terminal shells, like ZSH, have tab completion, where if you just hit tab a bunch of times, you can get it to list out a bunch of stuff. Bash has that too, although to a lesser degree by default. And I'll show you how that works in a second. But the one I'm interested in showing you guys right now is something called compgen. Compgen seems cryptic, but really it's a completion generator. So if you just type compgen, and if you type com like that, and then hit tab a few times, you'll see you'll get a list of commands. And compgen should be on that list. If you type the P, you'll notice the list gets, I think, one item smaller. And if you keep typing, eventually it'll just complete the command out. That is called, that's the completion feature in the shell. So you can use that to help you remember commands so that you don't have to remember the whole command, maybe just what it starts with. Compgen, and then if you do a tac-c, that is going to give you a list of every single command available on the system that you can actually type in and use. So these are all of the commands. Now, if you want to know more about a command, most commands have what they call a flag that is tac-tac help or tac-h. So if I type in cd tac-tac help, I think, yes, you'll get a little help page. That's one way to do that. I think tac-h will also do it. So we're going to talk about, no, tac-h will not. So the short counterparts aren't always available. Tac-tac help is usually fairly reliable for getting help. The other trick is man. So man and then cd. we'll, oh, there's no manual entry for that, so we'll do IP. There's a manual entry for IP. Okay, so that is another way to get help. You'll get a man page, or which is short for manual page. So that will give you some more help on various commands so that you can look up what each one does. So let's talk a bit about the structure of a command. Okay, let's go back up. So if you just hit the up arrow key, you'll be able to cycle through previous commands that you have entered. So we're going to talk about the structure of a command. Okay, so a command has usually about 3 different basic parts. So what you have is you have the command itself, and then you have the flags, which change the default behavior of the commands, and then you have arguments, which supply some information or data to the command that it can operate on. So in this case, CompGen, its behavior has been changed with the C flag to just output everything, because by default it will output nothing. And the ls is an argument we have supplied. And what that's going to do is it's going to output every single command that begins with ls. And that's a really interesting way to filter out that humongous list of commands so that you don't have to look through them all. If you can remember that certain commands begin with some letters, then you can use that in order to filter the list out and get a more generic, or get a more basic list that you can actually look at and determine what you're really trying to find. So understand that the list of commands is very daunting, and I don't even know all of them. That's crazy, because every program on your system essentially is a command in some way, shape, or form. Generally speaking, if your program has what they call a CLI counterpart or a CLI interface, then that will be a new command on your system, provided it's installed properly. So you can also find and use many extra, even additional commands in your package manager repository system, which we'll discuss in a later video. So that means not only are all these commands available by default, but you can actually extend that list considerably depending on what you install and how many things you install, and so on and so forth. So getting a list of available commands is kind of interesting, especially for a new user who doesn't really know many of them and doesn't understand what is technically possible. So let's talk about command line basics. What are the most basic commands everybody learns right from the start? Okay. Typically, the very first command you should probably learn is ls. ls will list the contents of a directory, and you can see in this case I have a whole bunch of extra directories. So we can extend ls a little bit by using some flags to change its behavior. So we'll give it a tag and we'll do al. This will list all files, and it will give us a long listing instead of the short listing. And now we can see these files with a dot in front of them. That is an effect of the A. The dot means that the file is normally hidden. This particular directory, because this is a directory, is a shortcut to the directory above. And this particular directory is actually a shortcut to the current directory. So a single dot points to the current directory, a dot points to the directory above, and any of these full words that begin with a dot are hidden folders or files, and any of these normal ones here are just regular directories that are not hidden. So let's take a look at how to move between directories, because I think that's another command that everybody should understand. And that command is very simple. It's cd. So we're going to change directories, and you can go to documents, right? Now, one thing to note, you'll notice I used a capital D here. That is because, unlike Windows, Linux is case sensitive. That means that I can make another directory if I cd back out using that dot directory up here, right? This will take me to the previous directory. Every single directory on your system is going to have a dot in it. All of them will have both of these. You'll only see them if you use that A flag up here, but they are there. And it's going to allow you to change directory back to the previous directory. That way you don't have to remember the full path that you were on. The computer will do that for you. So you can do that, and now you're back in your the directory you were in before, as indicated by our tilde. That means you're in your home directory. You'll notice here I was in tilde documents. That's because I was in the documents directory underneath your home directory. Also, you'll notice that when I did the cd command, and this is important, I did not put a / in front of the documents directory. You never want to do that unless you're actually trying to get to a directory underneath root, because the / is basically where everything starts. So if you cd and you start that path structure off with a /, it's going to be looking for paths underneath the root directory. If you just want to change to a folder in the current directory that you're in, which is usually the case, you just want to use the name of the directory with no special characters. So let's talk about finding out which directory you're in. What is the true path of the directory that I am in now? Well, you can do that with pwd, or print working directory. So that's going to list exactly where my home directory is. And you can see that it starts at root, home, Joe. So that's the directory I'm actually in, which means if I cd into documents, as you might expect, if I do pwd, I'll be in root, home, Joe, documents. Alright, let's cd back up, and we'll talk about making a directory. And that's very easy. It's mkdir for make directory. And you can give it a directory name. We'll call that test. Okay. So now we've made a directory called test. Now if we ls to list the contents of our folder structure here, you can see that we have the directory test is now available. Let's say I want to make a directory underneath test. But let's not stop there. Let's make 2 directories down from test. Do we actually need to cd into test in order to do that? No, we do not. We can just keep on going. We can add test, and then we can add Bob, and then we'll add files. Now this command's not going to work. I'll show you what will happen in a minute. I'm demonstrating this so that you can see the difference. So it's going to tell you it can't create the directory. Why does it say that? Because Bob doesn't exist yet. However, if we change the behavior of the original program with a flag, in this case TAC-P, it will absolutely create those directories. Now if I do an ls and change the directory of ls with a TAC-R and provide it the argument test, you'll see that it is listed Bob, well, I'm sorry, capital R. You'll see that it lists Bob, and it lists underneath Bob this files directory as well. So it allowed us to see what was underneath each directory recursively, hence the TAC-R for recursively. Now you'll notice this TAC-R didn't work. I'm not even sure what that actually did. Sometimes recursive is on capital, sometimes it's on lowercase. How do we find out? We can find out with our handy dandy man page. Let's do man ls. And in here, if we do /, right, and you'll see at the bottom here where my blinking cursor is, I've got a /, and then if I do a TAC capital R, you'll notice that it gives me my TAC capital R recursive flag. And if I do the same thing again, which I didn't actually have to back out of that, but that's fine. If I do a little r, it looks like, oh no, it should, oh, it reverses the order while sorting. So it's a reverse is the difference between the little r and the big R. So what that means is that if I'm in the main, where am I at? I'm in home, so if I do ls, and then I do ls with a TAC-R, you'll notice that the folders are reversed. So that's how you can change the behavior of a command. Don't let the flags scare you away. They are very useful and important. They can also be referred to, I think, as switches. Don't let that scare you. They can be very useful, but they can also be quite daunting because there are some commands that have hundreds of them. Another thing you might notice is that in our man page, when we look at some of these commands here, like for instance, our recursive command, you'll notice there's also a long version of that command, tac recursive. So you can actually use either one you want. It doesn't matter. The difference, though, is that when you're just entering commands, the short version of the switch or flag is there for you to use so that you don't have to type out the big long word. The big long word is there mainly so that, you know, if a command has so many switches, flags, whatever, that it's run out of letters to use, you can use the long word as a way of still, you know, providing access to some lesser used options. But the other great thing about them is that you can use the long words in scripts, and you really should, because it improves readability of your script. The short ones are for one-off commands in the command line. Mostly what you'll use. If you're writing scripts, use the long versions. That's the way you're supposed to do it. Unless, of course, there is no long version, like, for instance, in the case of this TAC-S, in which case you just use what's available to you. And if we tap a Q, we'll get out of that ls command. So we've covered, what, cd, pwd, ls, make directory. Let's remove a directory. So let's do cd ... Or actually, no, we don't need to do that. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. So let's cd into test, okay? And let's cd into Bob, okay? Now in here, we have files. So if we go into files, cd into files, right? We have a blank directory. But for our little experiment, I want to put a file in here so that we can see what happens if we try to remove a directory that has a file in it. So let's do a touch. And touching allows you to create a file if there's not one there already. The other effect it has generally is that it will update the timestamp on a file for access. So you can mess with the files that exist that way with touch as well. But most people just use touch to make a file. So we'll just make a test.txt file. So now if we do an ls, you can see that there is a file in that directory. So now let's cd back up, and we'll do RMDIR files. This command is not going to work because the directory is not empty. For RMDIR to work, the directory must be empty. Let's do a man RMDIR. You can actually do ignore fail on empty. Ignore each failure that is solely because a directory is non-empty. So let's try that out. What we can actually do, because this is a big long word and they don't have a good switch there, is we'll do RMDIR and we'll just use our middle mouse button and paste that. Just double click it and then highlight it to highlight it, and then use our middle mouse button to paste it in, and then we can try files again. And as you can see, files did not get removed. What that actually did is it ignored the error. So if there were other directories that it could have removed, it probably would have skipped files and removed them, but files is still there. So how do we remove a directory that has files in it or other content? Well, you can use rm for remove, and then use attack R for recursive, and then use files. That will remove the files directory and everything below it. Now, I'm going to give you some advice here, some cautionary advice. Never in a remove command should you ever trail your command with a /. Just get out of that habit. Don't put that in there. If it tab completes, it's fine. It's actually technically okay to do that. But what happens if I accidentally put a space between them? Well, that command tells you to remove the files directory and the root directory. And I could do that, but it will fail. And it's going to fail because my user account doesn't have permissions to remove the root directory. So if I press enter right now, it's not going to do it. And it actually tells you right in the command, don't operate recursively on root, because that's insane. But the important thing is when you're entering commands, whether you're changing ownership or whatever you're doing, leave the slash out, right? If you want to operate on the current directory, if you want to remove a directory that you're in, or if you want to change ownership of a directory you're in, do not. So let's look at permissions real quick. So if I touch a file, right? File.txt. Now we have a new file. Now if I do ls tag l, you'll notice I have these funny characters out here in the front. And we'll go into this a lot more in a later video. But this is who owns the file, the user and the group. So what I want to do is let's change the ownership. chown, and we'll give an account name. So let's give the account name root. We'll make root the owner of this file, okay? And we'll do file.txt, right? That's perfectly fine. That will work, right? But let's say we want to change the ownership not of the file, but of the directory we're actually in. What I recommend you do is use a dot. If you remember from up above, the directory indicate the two special directories. In every directory, one of them is a dot, and that is code for current directory, right? So if I do a Control-C, it will actually cancel the command, and I can do an ls tag al, and I can show you that the current directory right now is owned by me. I can change that to root with the command we were entering before, chown root and dot. Now what that means is it's going to change the ownership of root of the directory we are currently in to root, and you can see that. Oops. Except it's not going to be permitted because you need to be root to do it. Will that actually work? Yes, I think that will work. Yes, okay. So you need to be root to do it to the directory you're currently in. So this root directory here is now owned, or this current directory we are in is now owned by root. And you can see that even better if you cd up a directory and then ls tag l. You can see that Bob is owned by root. So if we cd back into Bob, now Bob is owned by root, but we don't want Bob to be owned by root. We want it to be owned by us. So what we did before was a mistake, and we don't want to do that. So let's do sudo chown joe to change ownership back, and we'll do dot you know what? There's something else I want to show you in addition to this. So let's take a look. Does Bob have any files underneath him? Oh, I'm in Bob. Okay. So yeah, we have a file under Bob. So let's look at that file. ls tag l. Okay, that file is also owned by us. Let's make that file owned by root. chown root file.txt. And it's not permitted because you got to be root to change it to root. So now if we look at our file, you can see that it too is owned by root. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because I want to show you a dangerous command. I want to show you a dangerous command so that you can hopefully avoid it. So let's say I want to change the directory that we are currently in to be owned by me. And let's say I don't just want to change the current directory, but I want to change all directories and items below the current directory. In other words, in this case, not only the directory I'm in, but the files.txt underneath it to be owned by me. I can do attack R, and that'll give me recursive. Now, the safe thing to do here is to just put a dot. But here's a problem. I see a lot of people put a / there. A lot. A very surprising number. And that's dangerous. On its own, just like you see it there, it's perfectly fine. That's safe. That does in fact point to the current directory. However, if, for instance, somebody doesn't hit the character correctly and they, mistype that dot, they might accidentally enter that command. And that would be catastrophic. That will make your system unbootable. Or they might do this, which will also make your system unbootable. So that is why, if you are entering commands, one of the safest things you can do is just leave that / off. Get out of that habit. It's horrible. In most cases, I can't really think of any case off the top of my head where that / helps anything. Usually it doesn't really provide any benefit, and generally speaking, if you mess up the command and enter it wrong and have that / there, it has the ability to damage your system in a lot of really destructive ways. And if you are entering your command with sudo in front of it, it means that you have the permissions to actually execute the command. So unless the operating system provides some sort of failsafe, you're probably not going to be booting your computer up anymore. And I think that's one of the other things that's kind of off-putting about the terminal, is that there are ways to damage your system if you're not careful. And a lot of people get scared because of it. But the good news is that there are good practices that we can all follow to make sure we all end up with systems that still boot at the end of the day. One of them is don't use that /. The other one is don't use sudo unless it's necessary. Don't make every file using the sudo command. Just get out of the habit of using sudo. If the computer tells you you don't have access to something you're trying to do, then consider using sudo. But before you consider using sudo, consider if it's something you really want to do in the first place. Like, for instance, don't launch your web browser with sudo. That's really stupid. Just don't do that. Stuff like that. So let's see. Is there anything else I want to talk to you guys about before we wrap up the video? We have made a directory. We've recursively removed stuff from directories. We've CD'd into directories. We've oh, here's a good one. Let's do a copy. So let's say I want to make another file and I want it to be the clone of this file.txt. Let's actually input some stuff into file.txt. And we're going to do that with the echo command. Which actually, do I even own that file yet? Oops. Did I fix that? I don't remember if I actually fixed that. No, I didn't. So let's do that. chown, sudo, chown, joe, tac r, dot. Now, if we look, we can do al, okay? And you get the ownership properly assigned in all of the folders. Okay, so now let's put some stuff in there. So we're going to do echo, and we'll just do a quote because it's going to be a string, and we'll just put some stuff. Okay? And then we'll output it into file.txt. That command will override anything in file.txt with some stuff. Literally the string some stuff. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I don't want to get into the text editors yet. So I'm just putting stuff in that file without having to demonstrate the advanced text editors and things. So if we enter this command, what this guy does is it will redirect the output of this echo command into the file.txt. So let me show you this without this bit here on the end first. So you'll notice what it did was it printed some stuff to the screen. This will allow you to print it into the file. So now, if I read what's in the file, and the easiest way to do that is with the cat command, which actually stands for concatenate and has other uses than just reading out files, that we'll go into in the more advanced sections. You can see that it will print out the contents of that file to the screen. You can also use the less command for the same thing, except it'll actually give you like a scrollable sort of thing that you can use the arrow keys to move up and down on. So if your file's really big, that's a good way to look at it. And then you press Q to leave or quit. So that will allow you to add text to that file. Now there are other easier ways to do that. You can obviously just use a terminal text editor like Nano or Vim, but those are outside the scope of this particular video, so I just wanted to dump some text in there so that you could see that we are going to copy this file and it will in fact be the same file just with a new name. That was the reason why I wanted to do this. So let's do the copy command, which is CP. CP will copy a file. So let's do file.text as the file we want to copy. Now let's give it a location we want to copy it to. We'll copy it to file2.text. Now if we ls, we should have two files, file and file2. And if we cat file, you'll see that it will have some stuff in it. And if we cat file2, you'll see that it also has some stuff in it. But let's say we want to rename a file. How do we rename a file? Because we don't want to do some two-step operation where we copy a file and then delete a file. That would be stupid. Well, the interesting thing here is there is no rename command. Well, there is a rename command, but it doesn't work the way you think it works. It's not really for the simple renaming of a file. Rename is actually an advanced command and will do more than you bargain for. Instead, you want to use the move command, mv. So we'll move file2 and we'll call it file3.text. And now if I ls, you'll notice I have file and file3. File2 has been renamed to file3. So that's how you rename a file in Linux, is you just move it from one location to another, and that gives you a renamed file. So that covers copy, move, making directories, deleting directories recursively, getting help, echoing stuff to a file, which is a little more advanced than I was hoping to get into, but I guess it's cool. And you even got a glimpse into how to do ownership of files, which we'll cover in a lot more detail in a later video. Let's go ahead and recap by cleaning up after ourselves. So let's CD, and I'll show you this trick, CD to home, because as I said before, home is a shortcut, or tilde is a shortcut for home. That's why it's the first character you see out here. And I mean that literally. It is a shortcut to home. So if I press enter now, I will go back home. If I do PWD, you can see that I am now in Home Joe. Hopefully you guys are following that. So if I ls, you can see that I have that test folder in there, but you know, that's kind of messy. We just made that to demonstrate stuff. We don't actually want to leave that there on a production system. That would be crazy. Let's remove it. So we can't do an RMDIR because it has stuff in it. If I do that, it's not going to work. It's going to tell me not empty. I could go through and empty that directory out, but I don't want to do that. I'm really lazy. So instead, I'm just going to do an RM, which is what you would normally use to remove a single file. Now you can't just do an RM on test either. That's not going to work, because it will tell you it's a directory. So what you have to do is change the behavior of your RM command with a flag that tells it to do things recursively. Now, if we ask it to remove that directory, it will do so happily. So what the takeaway here is if you enter a command in incorrectly, it's just not going to work in most cases, right? Even if it's a destructive command, as long as you're not entering it with sudo or as the root user, generally speaking, it's going to just fail. It's not going to function. It's not going to damage anything. The only way to really trash your system is to remove is to perform an action as the root user on a directory above the home directory. Even if you delete your entire home directory and completely trash your own user profile, yes, that would be terrible because it would cause data loss for you if you had, pictures or documents in there. But it would not trash your ability to work on the system, because what would happen is the system would just recreate anything it was missing and happily log you back in. It's not going to actually damage your ability to use the computer. It's just going to default your profile and log you back in normally. So, especially in the case of a system where you have no data on it, practice to your heart's content. It really is very easy and it's not that bad at all once you get into the swing of it. Practice really does make perfect. You're not going to learn all the commands in one day. It's okay to forget them. Just understand that it takes time and it takes practice. The best way to learn is to force yourself to live in the terminal. Just force yourself. Just say, I'm going to do everything from the terminal. Every time I want to look for a file, I'm going to do it in the terminal. If I want to move a file or rename a file, I'm going to do it in the terminal. And then you'll have the practice you need. If you are, on the other hand, a desktop user and you don't have any interest in the terminal, then by all means avoid it. It's fine. As long as you don't need the tool, nobody's forcing you to use it. It's there to help you. If you don't want the help or you don't want to use it, don't use it. There's no shame in that. However, if you're going to follow along in the advanced series, word of caution, the terminal will be mandatory because no one in their right mind runs a server with a GUI on it. That is way bloated and unnecessary. If you run your server with just a terminal, you can run a substantially better server environment, especially in the case of virtualization, because your server will need less resources from both the CPU and the RAM in order to make your environment work. GUIs are essentially heavy. They add a load to your computer. Every single one of them does. Some more than others, KDE and GNOME being pretty bad offenders because they're generally heavier feature-complete desktops. But every single one will add some measure of load. It will also add some measure of vulnerability. Because with computers, good security practice says that you should never use something that you don't need. You should only do the bare minimum required to be functional. If your goal is to play video games and surf the web and key up text documents in an office setting and generally perform tasks that require a GUI, then yes, you should install your GUI. If, however, you're trying to run a server that's going to host an Apache system or some sort of web server or maybe a chat server, it does not need a GUI at all. And installing one is just increasing what they call the attack surface of the system. So that's why it's important in Linux, if you want to do anything above the desktop, to learn the command line. Because any server environment is generally going to be command line only. Generally. Okay, so we've covered how to get to the shell and everything in GNOME. Now I just want to show you quickly how to get to it in KDE. So let's switch over to our KDE desktop. And you'll notice it's a little smushed here. That's just because it's in a virtual machine and I was too lazy to figure out why it wasn't working at the login prompt here. But anyway, yeah, so it builds to the full screen and stretches out nicely, so that's cool. So in here, if we just hit this little guy and go to console, we'll get it. We can also just type terminal in the top, and then you'll find it that way. Or you can type console in the top, whatever, and you can just hit that button and just start typing. So, terminal. But it should be on your thing by default. If it's not, just, you know, hit that button. And then that'll launch your terminal. I've actually got mine a little bit customized already. I sort of pre-did it in KDE. Just so you can see what I did. If you go to Edit Current Profile, if you just right click on it and go to Edit Current Profile, you'll see in here you've got an appearance, and you can change your appearance and alter your text size if you're interested in doing that. And then you can also hide your scroll bar on the side if you want, or show it on whichever side you want. And by default, yours may have a tab bar across the bottom to get to that. So you got to show the menu bar, and then in settings you do configure console, and then over here you've got tab bar, and in this one you can tell it to show the tab bar when needed, and that will hide the tab bar down there if you're interested in doing that. Another thing you can do is, if you go back over to general, you can uncheck show the menu bar by default, which is how I got it to get rid of this menu bar up here. Which I prefer, because I like my terminal to look as simplistic as I possibly can, so it has nothing to distract me from what I'm trying to do. So that is how you use the terminal, and as you can see, all the commands are exactly the same and everything's fine. Oddly, I have a test file in here. That's interesting. I've actually got a good bit more in this one than I had in the other one. However, you can see here that that test file is blank. So yeah, sorry, test. Anyway, text. I just wanted to take some extra time to show you what it looks like on the KDE side of things. Well, that's it for today. I think I'm going to stop there. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, or I'll just end up confusing people and making this video more difficult for new people than I would otherwise like to. So I hope you guys learned a lot. I tried to keep it sort of brief and sort of you know, newbie friendly, as newbie friendly as I possibly could. In a later video, I'm absolutely going to do a more deep dive on the terminal, and I'm going to show you guys some tricks and some really cool stuff that you can use to make your life a lot easier. So, you know, thank you guys for hanging in there, especially if you're a desktop user who was previously terminal shy. Hopefully this makes life, you know, interesting, and hopefully you got some ideas about some new ways you can use your computer. You know, thank you guys for watching.